Hello everyone, this is Kriti BK, faculty of Salesian College Sonada, and today I will be teaching BCom Semester 4, Indian Economy. And the topic for today is Economic Reform of the year 1991 or New Economic Policy. At the time India became free, its economy was underdeveloped, with poverty rampant and the quality of life dismally low. Now, in order to raise the level of living of the people, the government undertook the task of development of the country through the medium of 5 years plan. However, the government drastically changed its economic policies in the year 1991. The year 1991 has a special significance in the Indian economy. Many economic measures were introduced to achieve the objectives of new economic policies of the government. The economic reform basically aimed at rapid industrialization. For this, the abolition of industrial licensing, allowing foreign investment, encouragement to the private sector and coexistence of public sector and private sector were taken by the government. Now let us first define what economic reform is. Economic reform are the long-term dynamic combination of policies and programs for the speedy growth, efficiency in production and making a competitive market. The failure of the planning process led to the economic reform of the year 1991. In the years after independence, instead of showing high growth, high public savings and high degree of self-reliance, India was showing one of the lowest rates of growth in the developing world, with a rising public deficit and a periodic balance of payment crisis. Hence, India had to correct its clearly faulty developmental process. The background. The main aspects of India's economic reform of the year 1991 are LPG, that is, liberalization, privatization and globalization. India's economic reform began under the Narasimha Rao government with Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. The 1991 Indian economic crisis had its roots in 1985 when India began having balance of payments problems as imports swelled, leaving the country in a twin deficit. The Indian trade balance was in deficit at the time when the government was running on a large fiscal deficit. By the end of 1990, in the run-up to the Gulf War, the situation became so serious that the Indian foreign exchange reserves could barely finance 3 weeks' worth of imports. Thus, the World Bank and IMF also stopped their assistance, leaving the government with no option. This led the Indian government to airlift national gold reserves as a pledge to a large conditional bailout from the IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, and World Bank. This crisis led to the liberalization of the Indian economy as one of the conditions stipulated in the World Bank loan, requiring India to open itself up to participation from foreign entities in its industries, including state-owned enterprises. Now let us discuss what liberalization is. Liberalization means movement towards a free market system. Liberalization, otherwise known as withdrawal of regulation and restriction for private sectors. Private sectors are encouraged to enter into core industries which are reserved for the public sector. There was a liberalization in 5 sectors. Number 1, industrial sector reform. Under that, we have reducing industrial licensing. The NEP abolished the requirement of licensing except 5 industries like liquor, defense equipments, etc. Next is decreasing the role of public sector. Industries reserved for public sector has now reduced from 17 to 3. Example, railways, atomic energy, etc. Making MRTP Act more liberal. Now big industries are no longer required to seek government approval for establishment and expansion of new industries. Next we have freedom to import capital goods like machinery and raw materials. Next, the financial sector is another sector that was liberalized. Under that we have establishment of private sector banks. The basic purpose of adopting this policy is to increase competition, which ultimately leads to lower rate of interest and good quality of service. Next is changing the role of RBI. The RBI is now changed from regulator to facilitator of financial sector, which means financial sector can take decision without consulting RBI. Next, foreign investment limit. In banks, it was increased up to 51%. And the last is ease of expansion. Banks were given freedom to set up of new branches and rationalize existing branches without any approval of RBI. The next sector that was reformed was fiscal policy reform. Under that we have reduction in direct taxes. The rate of direct taxes is reduced so that it encourages the citizens to promote saving and voluntary disclosure of savings. Next, the government also regulate and reduce the role of indirect tax so that a common national market for goods and services can be established. The process of taxation is also simplified so that a common man can easily understand the structure. Fourth sector that was reformed was foreign exchange reform. Under that we have devaluation of rupee and adoption of flexible exchange rate system. The last sector that was reformed was trade and investment reform. Under that we have reduction in quota up to a maximum limit, removal of export duty, removal of import duty, import licensing was abolished except in case of hazardous and environment sensitive industries. Now we talk about privatization. Privatization generally means transforming all economic activities from public sector to private sector. It also refers to the setting up of private units in public utility services. Under privatization we have contraction of public sector. The private sector are no longer restructured to enter in any industry except atomic power, railways and defense. Next we have government companies have been sold by central government to private capitals which were incurring loss in the year 1991. The next point under privatization is PSU by selling a part of equity to the public. This process is known as disinvestment. The last point is PSUs have given additional power and freedom to enter joint ventures, raise debts. Okay, now we come to globalization. So globalization refers to where a country draws raw materials from any source of the world and manufacture goods and services. The finished goods also find a place in the global market. Thus, globalization is actually a linkage of nations' markets with global market. Under globalization, we have increase in the limit of equity in foreign investment. The limit of equity changed from 40% to 51% or even higher. The next point under globalization is reduction in tariff. The amount of tariff was reduced up to the maximum limit so that international competition limit and technology upgradation can be enjoyed. Removal of quantitative restriction is another point. And the last point under globalization is partial convertibility of rupee. The currency is free to determine its own value in the international market on the basis of demand and supply which attract foreign currency. So here we have understood that the economic reform of the year 1991 is all about LPG, and that is liberalization, privatization and globalization. Hope this audio lecture was helpful to everyone. Thank you.